All right, good morning everyone to the west of the Rocky Mountains. Good afternoon East Coast, good evening to our friends in Europe. Welcome. I'm Lane Nooney. I'm a computer and video game historian in the Media Studies Department at New York University. I'm also one of the co-founders and managing editor of ROMchip, a journal of game histories, the host for today's talk. I'm also, for those of you who are frequent attendees, I'm also really thrilled to say I have a special guest here with me today. Drum roll, please.
Hello. That was really uncomfortable.
For those of you who don't know, this is Phil Salvador, Library Director of the Video Game History Foundation. I need to keep this microphone out of your head, Phil.
How do I do that? Myself?
Hello. Okay, hello. Phil just happened to be in town, and he wanted to join us for this fun, exciting historical event.
I want to hear what Courtney has to say.
All right. So, who am I again, right? I shepherd, chat is going off, as they say. Dubs in the chat. I shepherd the journal alongside my talented collaborators and co-editors, Henry Lowood, Dave Parisi, Soraya Murray, Logan Brown. Give a shout out if you're here. And I'm so excited to have everyone joining us here today for the latest in our irregular series of Twitch talks that we host called ROMchip Presents. Usually we do these as a run-up to our annual winter fundraiser, but these have been so popular that we like to do a couple during the summer and fall too. So if you don't already, subscribe to our newsletter or our Discord, join us, we'll drop links in the chat, stay on top of what we're doing. And so I know we've got a lot of friends and fans in the audience, but in case you're new to ROMchip, we like to say that we are an open access, hybrid audience online venue for the publication of game history. What that means is that as a venue, we develop, solicit, edit, and publish work across a range of formats: traditional academic peer-reviewed articles, interviews, oral history, short-form essays, and translations, dealing with everything from video games to board games, analog games, sports, and play. As an open access journal, we have no paywall, no advertising, no logins, no predatory publishing model. You don't have to pay anything to read the research published in ROMchip ever. We are trying to model a different kind of future for academic publishing. And lastly, we call ourselves hybrid audience because we've been trying to create a big tent around game history, a place where we can have rigorous historical engagement with as many people as possible who want to do that work. So part of our mission is that you shouldn't need a PhD to be able to write for, or interview for, or read ROMchip. So this current talk series, ROMchip Presents, is an extension of that mission to bring historical work to a live audience through the power of Twitch. And as you may be guessed, we are only able to do that with your support. We are entirely crowdfunded academic enterprise. Everything that happens under ROMchip's hood, from the free open access journal, these free talks, being able to pay. Oh, Phil just gave me $1. You can too, folks, at donate.romchip.com. We are really only able to keep doing this because people like Phil give us dollars, because this community knows how valuable this is.
I just funded 2 minutes of the stream.
Incredible work. Right, and they support this to keep it happening, right? So, like, we know that big institutions aren't going to save us, universities aren't going to save us, corporations can't solve game history, but every day, a legion of very small donors are making game history possible. Your pennies, your dollars are paying for the guys on the back end running this stream, our copy editor, our server fees, right? So if you are in a position to give, I encourage you, invite you, I perhaps even insist that you click the link or go to donate.romchip.org. Every donation we get helps us squeak a little more fun out of this very, very goofy project we do. All right, so with all of that mandatory marketing spiel out of the way, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, who is Carly A. Kocurek. She is Professor of Digital Humanities and Media Studies at the Illinois Institute of Technology, where she holds many other titles, including Director of Game Design and Experimental Media and Associate Dean. You may know her best for writing one of the earliest historical monographs in the field of game history, Coin-Operated Americans Rebooting Boyhood at the Video Game Arcade, which is a must-read if you haven't already. She's also the author of Brenda Laurel, Pioneering Games for Girls, co-author of Ultima and World Building in the Computer Role-Playing Game, and co-editor of Historiographies of Game Studies, What It Has Been, What It Could Be, a title that sounds like its own epic JRPG. So her work has appeared in journals like Game Studies, Visual Studies, the Journal of Popular Culture, and more. She also co-founded and co-edits the influential Game Designers book series for Bloomsbury, also something to check out if you're a video game history fan. And Carly is also an internationally exhibited game designer. Paste Magazine called her game Choice Texas one of the best games of 2014. She's won honors from Indiecade's Climate Jam and Golden Cobra Challenge. She successfully crowdfunded her own games. She's on ROMchip's editorial board where she helps us out with peer review. Basically, she balls, everybody, all right? I've known Carly a long time. She's a real role model in the field for her collegiality, her mentorship, her generosity, her humor, and her hustle. I didn't know what Carly was working on when I pitched her on doing a ROMchip talk. And when she sent me back the title of today's talk, I literally squealed in my office. I was like, this is going to be so fantastic. I'm so excited to hear what you have for us today. And I'm excited for us to look a little more into this, the analog play of what American girls have to tell us about what American girls play. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way, hand this over to Carly, and let her do her thing.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks so much for the very kind introduction. So the thing on the screen right now is actually the version of my office that I made during the pandemic for my students so that they could like imagine they were in a much cleaner, less paper strewn version of my office. But I've kept it because it makes me laugh. So I started working on this. It's kind of a side quest from a much larger, longer term project I've been working on about the history of the Games for Girls movement. And I feel like that project is cursed. Like I got grant funding and then there was a pandemic and it like messed up all the travel I had planned for the grant. And then I did all the interviews and then the university decided to change like all of our data storage systems and now all my files are jumbled. So it's just like, it's one of those things, but I've been trying to use this project as a way to kind of get back at thinking about that project more and hopefully opening all my very disorganized files and not crying about it. But I've been interested in the Games for Girls movement for a long time. It's part of why I wrote about Brenda Laurel. And I was completely fascinated when in 2000, in fact, October 2000, Mattel released the Courtney Moore doll as the newest in the American Girl dolls historical line. So this is Courtney. She's a doll like all the other dolls in the line. And I have to point out like how bizarre and meta this is because in fact, I'm pretty sure part of why this doll's story is set in 1986 is because it means she can have an American Girl, or at least a Pleasant Company, as the brand was known at the time, catalog and her own doll. And if you'll notice, the doll I have on the first one, Molly, which is the doll I had when I was a kid, is in fact the doll that Courtney has. Courtney's a little older than me, but not much, right? And so there's always, anytime there's a new historical character, there's a lot of like, is this history, right? Because the 80s feels very, very present to a lot of people. And of course it's history, right? And now they have a doll from the 90s, so people can be even more uncomfortable. But they start with this character and there's a lot of interest in the kind of like stuff that comes with these dolls. Like the thing that Mattel does now with American Girl and that the Pleasant Company did prior is they really do a lot of interesting things with the material culture of childhood. So this is one example of that, but there's a lot that goes into that. So you've got Courtney, she's a doll, right? But she's also a character. And so they do all these really beautiful like photo shoots of the doll and stop motion, like stories about the doll and all these things. But the story for Courtney Moore is set in 1986. She is part of a blended family. She lives with her stepsister and her mother and stepfather. And in this first story, she's dealing with like tensions with her stepsister and then like her father's moving away, and like there's all these kinds of like tensions. Her mom's like running for mayor. There's just a lot going on. And the whole narrative here is that like she's so into games that she decides to make a game and she only succeeds at the project because she decides to tell a different kind of story, right? Like that's kind of the the meta here, her stepfather works at the mall. She spends all her time at the mall and she loves playing video games. And it talks about this at length in that first story. And it's also present in different ways throughout her kind of material world. So in particular, she plays Pac-Man. And you could, this was like the big flashy thing you could get when the doll first was released. It's a fully functional, it doesn't take quarters. That's the part that doesn't function, but it's a fully playable, like the joystick works, the buttons work, Pac-Man cabinet. It's from it's actually a like collaboration with a company called Quarter Arcade that makes these extremely cute quarter size arcade cabinets, and they're fully licensed, right? Like this is a Pac-Man cabinet that happens to be small. And it's roughly the right size for the doll. It's actually not totally the right size for the doll because remember this doll is supposed to be like a 9 or 10-year-old girl. So it's like close-ish to the right size, right? Which I think is a little interesting in terms of kind of her relationship with this toy, but it's like, what are they going to make like a 30% arcade? You know, like it's just like not going to be perfect scale. They're just going to use what they have. As an aside, this company is super interesting. You can buy like Quarter Arcade, like bar stools and like everything. Like you could build out like your whole tiny arcade if that was a thing you wanted to do. But as there was this big splash about like who would spend this much money on an arcade cabinet for a doll, blah, blah, blah. I was struck by something weirder, which is like, why is she playing Pac-Man? In 1986, Pac-Man's kind of old. And it's like it would not have been one of the top arcade games by that point. Like it would have been eclipsed even by Ms. Pac-Man. And really by 1986, you're talking about console games, right? So it's like, that's kind of weird. But I think there's like a few different things going on here, right? So like I said, Pac-Man at this time is pretty old. Ms. Pac-Man's much more recent and in fact fits narratively better with the story they're trying to use this doll to tell, right? Like it would make more sense for her to play Ms. Pac-Man. Here she is at the doll mall where they have an Orange Juicy instead of Orange Julius. And so like, wouldn't she be playing a Nintendo Entertainment System, right? Like this is very squarely after the period where there's this massive crash in the US arcade industry. So like, even if you were spending lots of time in the mall, like it would have been different than this, right? But there's a few things going on here narratively, and there's also a few things going on in terms of just realities of the industry, right? So one of the reasons this is set in 1986 absolutely is because they wanted to talk about the Challenger disaster, right? And so there's a lot of recurring stuff, and it's a major plot point in the story because like thousands and thousands of children across the United States, she was watching the Challenger launch in school, right? And so that disaster was really present for a lot of children at this time. I really suspect, though, what's going on with the games themselves is licensing. So even if you just like look around at this point in time, there's a lot more licensed merchandise for Pac-Man than for Ms. Pac-Man, right? And that has to do partially with who owns that IP and what they're willing to do with it. And of course, there's like the new Pac-Man reboot happening where it's going to be like, you know, a fantasy like 2D full motion adventure game. So they're still doing a lot of interesting things with Pac-Man. Ms. Pac-Man exists very differently. And as we all know, Nintendo keeps a very, very tight leash on their IP. So like, you're probably not going to be able to license like, you know, an NES for the doll. So we get Pac-Man, right? Like, I think that's roughly what happens there. So it also, though, contributes to this narrative where like she's actually concerned about this kind of like lack of representation in games, right? Or around games. And there's tons about how like she's the best at the arcade. She has all the top scores, all these things, probably because she's there all the time, because she's like kind of benignly neglected, like many children in this generation. But I also think it really has to do with nostalgia. Like, I think they want a game that like is splashy, the visuals are appealing. So there's a narrative story here about games and who's shown in games and who makes games, but there's also like who are the parents of children roughly this age now, right? Like, and American Girl really markets to like the kind of like pre-tween, how many divisions of age do we have, but that kind of like 8 to 12, like 7 to 11 type market. And a lot of parents of those children are like almost the same age that Courtney, at least like fake, is, right? So there's kind of like a lure there, right? And so similarly to like when I was a kid, like my mom remembered all the things that Molly had. I remember many of the things that Courtney had, right? And so there's really like a market logic at play here. So they probably wanted an arcade cabinet because, in fact, an arcade cabinet is like splashier and weirder and more fun in terms of things you might give a doll. And you'll notice the doll also has like a Walkman and a lip smacker and like, you know, her little tights. So something I like to note is like the kind of like, and here's again Molly versus Courtney, right? Because Molly is the doll shown on this catalog cover. I think this particular cover is from later in 1986, but it's the exact same cover that was on the first catalog that Pleasant Company ever sent out. And then on the right is the launch cover from the catalog when Courtney was released. If you look at the early catalogs for American Girl, and this continues somewhat, but nowhere near as much, it always showed a girl reading. In fact, like the first like several years that the company's in business, literally every catalog has a girl reading. Often in these kind of like soft focus, dreamy, domestic things. They're very like, this is very 80s, right? But she's got the book, she's got the doll. In fact, if you look closely, the doll is like next to the book right in front of the doll. The doll is wearing that outfit, right? It's her school story. And so there's this real kind of like domestic, wholesome imaginary of girlhood happening. And that the dolls are part of that, but there's also something kind of like nostalgic always, right? Like it's a soft focus view of childhood. That has shifted somewhat, right? Like the cover of the Courtney launch catalog, there's no book, right? I mean, there is a book, but it's like inside. The cabinet is really the flashy thing they're selling here, right? Like meet Courtney. You're not going to meet her in the book the way that you met Molly. You're going to meet her at the arcade. You're going to meet her through play and you know, with this cabinet that's really, really front of mind. So she's not the only doll with her own toys and games, though, which I think is really important to understand. So that cabinet is unique for how expensive it is. Julie, the 1970s character that had been released a couple years prior and had been the newest historical character, had a pinball machine that you could buy. The pinball machine, though, interestingly, wasn't a specific pinball game. It was just like, it is a pinball game, but it doesn't, like Pac-Man's a real arcade machine you could go play. Julie's pinball is just like called some kind of generic 70s thing, and it's just like very cute. And you can play it, but it's not like a famous pinball game. But these are some of the Christmas spreads from the earlier dolls. So Kirsten, Samantha, and Molly are the first three launched, and then Felicity's launched a couple years later. But in their Christmas sets, you can see the kinds of toys. I'm going to talk about these just for a moment. So Molly has like her little nurse doll. She has a snow globe. She has a painting set. She has a radio. She has barrettes, right? Like a yo-yo. And so these are imagining the kinds of things a girl might have played with. Molly's story is set during World War II. Samantha's story is very squarely kind of like in the Victorian era, late Victorian. Right. And she's got like her little gingerbread house and her little, like, I think it's a book. She also had a music box at one point. She has like a little doll that's like a porcelain doll. That's her doll, right? That's very much of that period. If you look over to Kirsten on the far right of the screen, she has this very sweet, like embroidered doll, right? Like the dolls all have dolls. Felicity has a paper doll. And so you're always kind of like, there's the doll itself, and then there's the toys the doll has. or the games the doll has. And there's always this kind of like multi-layered thing because, of course, a doll can't actually play Pac-Man. You play Pac-Man as the child that's playing with it, right? And that's true with all these other things as well, whether that's paper dolls or checkers or, a craft kit or any of the other things that were sold as accoutrements for the doll. So even though they're historical things, they're really contemporary playthings for the girls that the dolls are imagined for. And so I think there's kind of three big things at play here that really make this possible. This is a later catalog from when Addie launched. Addie was the first Black character in this universe. And I like that, they have her here on the cover and they're in their like matching Christmas dresses, which is why I selected this particular image, right? And so one of the major factors here and like why you might choose to make an arcade cabinet or even a video game for a doll is that girls look for dolls that are like them. So even when we're looking at the past, we're looking for resonances with contemporary culture or things that will make sense to children today, right? There's all kinds of things that would have been historically accurate or historically interesting related to childhood in these various periods that you just wouldn't include because they're not going to be appealing to children today. And they might even be uncomfortable for adults today. And indeed, a lot has been written about how Addie occupies like a really, really peculiar space in this universe because all of the characters have problems, but Addie's problem is that like she lives in the antebellum US, right? Like, and she's Black, which is a really, really different scale of problem than like, I don't know, your dad's moving, but is really loving and will clearly keep in touch with you, which is what like Courtney's dealing with, right? So some of this is just looking for resonances between contemporary girls and the doll characters that we're imagining for them. Another thing is that like, what counts as a wholesome pastime changes over time, right? So it's hard to imagine, I think, video games as a wholesome pastime if we're talking about 1985, like in 1985. But if we're talking about it now, of course, children play video games. That's totally normal. And shown here, these are like Molly's birthday treasures, or whatever they call them. And she has like pin the tail on a donkey. She has a jump rope. She has a little birthday cake with her little candles you can put on it and a red plate to put the cake on. And then my favorite, because it's so weird actually. This is a miniature fake. I mean, I guess all of it's fake because it's for dolls, but it's a doll-sized milk bottle and doll-sized clothespins. And it was to play this game where you drop the clothespins into the milk bottle, which I don't know. It's World War II, I guess, but it feels like the most Depression era thing in any of the doll accessories in this brand. But anyway, what counts as wholesome changes over time, right? So we're often imagining a past because we're imagining that's when childhood was like more authentic or more uncorrupted or more like proper for children or more appropriate or something like this. But you can see that that's a moving target. And so part of what's interesting is each new historical character comes out, that target has moved, right? So like now it's easy and kind of like charming to imagine children playing Pac-Man, even though at the time that Pac-Man was first released, that was actually very fraught, right? Similarly, the mall, right? Like the mall's actually a liminal and contested space, and children's position in it is liminal and contested. But in the story, like it's imagined as a place that's very comfortable for her, and that she moves through really confidently. And then the other one I think is that this is fundamentally, and this is true of all of the American Girl stories and all of the American Girl brand, is that fundamentally what they're doing is creating a speculative fiction about a past where girls are actually taken seriously and treated as if they matter, right? Because every single one of these books or films or any other media they make, stories they make, are really about girls having an impact or kind of like self-actualizing, right? And so it doesn't matter if, in reality, you're a 9-year-old girl and actually nobody cares about what you say. Like you actually have this like profound impact on your community or on your family, or on your peers. And that's like a really different way of imagining childhood. And it's a really intoxicating way of imagining childhood, right? And this isn't like full on like fantasy land, like you're the chosen one and you're going to save the world. That's not what's happening, right? It exists within kind of like a reality adjacent history. But it imagines like, what if girls were actually taken seriously? And when you do that, you start seeing a really different kind of reality. And these books are really meticulous in their historical background. Like they actually do archival research for these. Like they have a staff historian, right? Like this is taken quite seriously. And again, just to mention, because I brought it up earlier, that Challenger disaster, right? You can actually see on the chalkboard in the background, there's something about the Challenger, and that television is implied to be there because they're about to watch that, right? And there's like the little planets and things like that because it's a classroom. And of course, there's the pencil box with the shaped erasers, which you can buy because you can buy everything. And the paper in the front that she's holding says Crystal Star Shooter on it because that's her video game character that she develops, right? And so I think there's like these three kinds of things at play. One is that they're trying to make dolls that reflect the reality of the girls that they are marketing to, right? Girls, that like idea of being like your doll or the doll being like you, is really seen as kind of like validating, appealing, marketable. What counts as a wholesome pastime changes. So we're going to see an interesting set of shifts in what pastimes are made for the dolls. And then third, like, all of these are speculative fiction about a past where girls are actually taken seriously. And so they're never quite history. They're always this kind of like retcon or this refitting of a history that was actually often quite uncomfortable. And I don't necessarily think that's bad, right? Like I actually don't know that we need to revisit our childhood traumas and like share them with our own children. But I think what's important here, and here's that pinball cabinet that you could get for Julie. It's a fully functioning pinball cabinet. It's discontinued now. But when dolls play, girls play, right? Because the person that can actually, or the entity that can actually play pinball is not your 18-inch Julie doll, right? It's you, it's the child. And so the thing exists and it's brought into the home as if it belongs to the doll, which is like a totally fascinating premise, right? But it really belongs to the girl. And this idea of girls having whole game systems, even if they are single game systems or miniature arcade systems that are their own, is actually pretty radical and pretty interesting. Because they're not usually the target market. And I love how like aggressively feminized this pinball cabinet in particular is, right? Like this, I know it's like a very 70s aesthetic, but like you can do 70s that feels like much less feminine. And this is like a very girly 1970s. And I also love Julie's little hat. And so that's part of what's at play here too, is like, how do we get these things to girls? And it's like the doll is almost a Trojan horse for these other things. And that's important to note because a bunch of researchers who have looked at girls' access to games have found that actually hardware access is one of the major barriers for girls playing. Like that they'll bring consoles into the home, but they're brought in to be shared. And if there's older children or boy children in the house, like they'll dominate the console. And the girls are just like, yeah, that's fine. I'm not going to fight for this. And so giving girls their own hardware or imagining girls as having their own hardware is actually really important. And if you look here, this is another product from American Girl. So they have the historical dolls, but then they also have these like contemporary dolls, and they keep changing the name of the line, but like, or you could get a custom doll that looks like you, whatever. But they do a lot of interesting things with this. Like you can buy mobility aids for the dolls. Like the doll can have a hearing aid. The doll can be like bald, the doll, right? Like there's a lot of ways to kind of like think about all the different ways that children's bodies might look that aren't always shown on dolls, which I think is very cool. But this is actually like an Xbox collaboration they had. And so you got like this gaming chair that was actually like a Bluetooth speaker, but you also got the dolls like little gaming accessories. So there's a little console and you can put little, they're like fake discs. Well, I mean, they are discs, but they're little, like, it almost works like a viewfinder or something. So it just like projects little screen images, very cute. And then she has her little headset, right? Like super sweet, but actually functional, like actually works as a speaker as well. So it occupies this kind of interesting space because you as a girl cannot play with this as if it's games, but you can play with it, right? So a lot of what's at play here, I think, with Courtney is that in 2020, in the past decade, we're really at a moment where the gender gap in technology is this like fairly politically neutral problem to solve, right? Like, of course we need more women in computing, of course, right? Like, and some of this has to do with just like the needs of a workforce, right? That they need more people that can do this kind of work. So when Courtney was released, American Girl actually had a partnership with Girls Who Code. They did dollar for dollar donation matching up to $50,000. And they also did a series of scholarships for girls who wanted to participate in Girls Who Code programming and like camps and things like this. And so this exists in this moment, and like it's a present problem, but we get to talk about it in the past, so we don't have to be uncomfortable with what we're doing right now, and we can support something that's benefiting girls at the moment, right? Like wholesome, easy, feel good kind of thing. Obviously, in the past 5 years, that has become much, much more fraught, which I think is interesting in its own right. It's not something I'm going to go into at length here, but I do think it's something worth thinking about. That, like, in fact, 5 years ago, like, of course, girls should play games and make computer software and like work in the tech industry was like so neutral that like major companies were like, yes, this is how we sell dolls, right? And that's not the landscape I think we're in at this moment. So I think part of the dolls' appeal too is it lets them kind of do something wholesome because it's exposing girls to computing. And that's part of the logic of the Games for Girls movement as well. But I always kind of get to the end of talking about things like this. And this is for a headline, I believe, from 2020. It was when the statue of the young girl went up in New York, right? Like, I can't remember the Defiance or whatever her name is, but and this was one of the headlines, right? America's daughters grow up to be women it can't handle. Defiant young girls have become a political symbol in a country that fears grown women. And so I always land back at this thing as like empowering girls, why bother, right? Like, and I don't mean like because I don't think girls count or something, but I mean we're going to train people into these jobs and into this like these kinds of ambitions that they're then punished for having, often over and over again. And so like there's a really uncomfortable tension then if we're like training girls to think about themselves as belonging in the game industry, as belonging in the tech industry, as having equal access, right? And then that access is never actually a real thing. So that's like one tension I see here. And then the other one that makes me like actually feel really grim about things is like, is this good for girls or is it just good for late capitalism? Like, is having more girls in computer science in any way beneficial to girls? I don't know, right? Like, and I increasingly don't know as I watch the kind of boom and bust cycles in the tech industry and in particularly in computer science, where those of us who are in higher ed have watched that market become incredibly saturated. So is getting more girls in going to do anything, or is it just going to like help bring the salaries down for the companies that want to hire people? I don't know, right? Like that's kind of what's happened in medicine, which is a huge bummer too. So I mean, on the one hand, this is complex and I have like a lot of thoughts about it and I'm not sure. And I think it's all ultimately very, very ambiguous, even if it's all very, very well intentioned. But at the same time, you can buy like a teeny doll size caboodle and that's like really, really cute. So I don't know. And just to like end, and then I'm happy to answer questions. These are my books. The 3 on the right are out in the world. And I'll mention Ultima. That book is actually open access, so you can get it through the press's website for free, and that will also be the case with historiographies of game studies. The 2 in the middle you can of course purchase or ask your library. That's always nice for me too. So thanks for listening. I will answer questions. I'm going to stop sharing because otherwise I can't see anything and it kind of makes me sad. So thanks.
All right. Oh, here I'm up, and
There
we can just barely get Phil in. Oh. I'm on the. There we go. There we go.
We're good.
Yeah, that was great. I don't know if you could see the Twitch chat, Carly, but everyone is saying that was great, fantastic, a ton of fun. Phil and I were here, both like cracking up and being like, "Oh, so interesting."
Yeah, I just want to add really quick, Carly. While we were talking, I saw on Lane's desk over here they have this Oregon Trail Christmas ornament with a little thing on the screen, and so this was good for thinking about like the commercialization of nostalgia and what it means in particular context, and all part of the same bigger
Matt Payne's current project is actually about Oregon Trail specifically, and like I feel bad for him because I just text him like all Oregon Trail merchandise I see, and I'm like bought an eyeshadow palette, and I'm like, Matt, there's Oregon Trail eyeshadow, and he's like,
what?
Okay, and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this knowledge, So
it does say you have died of dysentery on it.
That's not a phrase from the get. Okay.
I keep it as a pile of toys on my desk for my students.
Thanks.
First of all, folks, as you come up with questions, drop them in the chat. I will farm them from the chat so we can share them with Carly. But to start off, there's already been a couple questions folks have had about kind of the way that this kind of relates to maybe dolls more generally as a product category. So, Logan sort of, he said, I really like this idea of reading toys as a kind of meta-ludic approach to studying play. OT22, Tony also said that, given most dolls, in this era are designed by adults, right? Do we see the same nostalgic present bleeding into dolls more broadly? So I think there's a question about, is this about something that American Girl is doing specifically, or do we see this in a broader way across the entire dolls category?
Yeah, I mean, you'll definitely see it across the toy category broadly, right? So, like, we can probably all think of examples of this. Like, there's been like you can get a beautiful box edition of Twister, right? And like, why is that the case, right? Like, it's because who's buying it now, right? Scrabble, that you can get like the nice edition that goes on your bookshelf. Like, I think we've had a real shift in the US in how we think about adults playing with toys too, which I also think is actually part of this. So I live in Chicago. There's an American Girl place here, and you can go to the cafe and there are always groups of adults there alone. And it's not weird. Like, that's fine. Go do that. It's fun. They serve alcohol. It's great.
Yeah.
It's like the least stressful. Yeah.
I know we're doing after the stream.
All right. Next time we go to SCMS, you got to take me to the American Girl doll bar. Okay.
I will totally take you there, and then we can sit there, and they will loan you a doll to dine with you, if you do not have your own doll. It's great. Yeah. But so yeah, that's absolutely part of it. It's also important to keep in mind that like really kind of like pre 1950s ish. I don't know the exact date, but like dolls weren't characters until like we start seeing mass production in a certain way. And so like even some of the early dolls that have names, they're not like, they don't have like a story. Barbie's really important there. So are some of these other doll brands that started at that time. And so like this is really riding a wave of shift where like dolls start to become like the doll's a person. The doll has a story, right? Like the dolls don't have stories. Right? Like,
yeah, we can't doll inception.
I don't know anything about Samantha's porcelain doll. It's just a doll. But now we get to Courtney and we know exactly who Molly is, right? Or we know exactly who Barbie is. And Barbie's, of course, having a huge kind of global moment culturally, as is Mattel, right? Like Mattel's really thinking about itself as an IP company and as a media company in this moment, which is completely fascinating.
Yeah, versus something, I guess, like Raggedy Ann came to mind, right? Is sort of it's just a doll with a name, but not a history.
Well, there's actually an entire comic series that goes with those that we've like largely forgotten. But yeah, like and really like Raggedy Ann is a commercial product version of a homemade toy, which is also a weird thing. But definitely before that, you would just like buy a doll. It'd be like, this is a baby, it's a doll. And you still see dolls like this, right? Like you can go in like Walgreens, and if you go to the weird sad toy aisle that always has like half good toys and half total crap, but like among the total crap, like they'll have like generic baby dolls, and it's like one of the few places you still see those.
Yeah. I am curious a bit about the company history. So when and why did it change its name from the Pleasant Company, which I had never heard, and that's such a wild name. To like American Girl doll.
It's like peak New England, so it's because it's founded by a woman named Pleasant Rowland.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah. And so it's eventually so it's the American Girl doll collection or American Girl collection by Pleasant Company, because Pleasant Rowland starts it. And if you look in the old catalogs, there's like all this like kind of like it's like when you read like the back of your artisanal honey, it's like that, but about dolls, right? Like where it's like our happy doll maker, you know, like she sketched these and she used to be a teacher and all these things, but it's eventually acquired by Mattel. And like, it's interesting because like the branding of American Girl remains distinct, even though it's part of Mattel. And so it's easy to forget it's part of Mattel. But it's partially because they've let it function as a wholly owned subsidiary. So it really has like an inside, like it has its own team, it has its own staff, all those things. But yeah, so a lot of that change happens because it goes from being this kind of like tiny ambitious company to being something else. Something worth mentioning with that I find really interesting. The doll prices have barely changed. So an American Girl doll in like 1986 was like $85 and now it's like $95. So like they're still seen as expensive, but they're nowhere near as expensive as they were once you start thinking through like, you know, inflation and whatnot.
Yeah. Oh, someone just joked they don't have the Intellivision license anymore. Otherwise, you could have gotten a Mattel cross license.
Oh, right, Mattel, right.
I also, and maybe it's because the WNBA All-Star Game is happening this weekend. It's like on the top of my mind. But do any of the American Girls dolls play sports?
Yes, Julie in fact plays basketball, and her story is about Title IX.
Wow.
So like it's really intentional and intense about like things that were happening historically. And in fact, my daughter has Julie because this was like a couple of years ago. I'm like, it's your Christmas present or your birthday present. It's the big one. You can have any doll you want as long as it's from the historical section. And she picked Julie. And indeed, she's weirdly obsessed with basketball because Julie plays basketball.
I love it. I love it. Tony's asking, who are some of the scholars that are helping you think through toys, dolls, and video games together? I think that was one of the things that I most liked about this talk, and the way in which we want to demonstrate that ROMchip is like not just video games. There's all these ways that we think about what you, I think, rightly called a sort of material culture of childhood and girlhood that is ripe for being discussed in the context of the journal. So I would love to know more about vis-a-vis Tony's question, like who's helping you think about this?
Cool. Yeah, I would definitely look at Vivian Paley's work. Is it? Yes. So she really starts in early childhood. She wrote this like whole book about dolls. There's I actually have the piece I wrote for the historiographies book is actually about kind of play studies and imagining game studies through play studies, which in fact a lot of it comes out of early childhood, like at Maria Montessori's like descendants intellectually. The Opies, I think, are really important, right? Like, and they do a lot about like child folklore. And I love child folklore because it's a reminder that children are like innately very, very creepy. Right? Because there's like things we don't know, like that like cool S thing that all of us learned how to draw when we were kids. Nobody knows where that's from. Like, and it's been found like it's practiced globally by children of a certain age, and they all learned it from other children.
Oh God, that's so weird. That's right.
Right? Yeah.
It just brought me to another comment from someone in the chat, which was like this idea of like, it's like the emphasis on the wholesomeness of games is so interesting, given that, as you rightly put it, children are creepy and they do creepy things to their toys, right? Including their dolls, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which I think was sort of like a lot of the Barbie movie really leaned into nicely.
Yeah. But I mean, there's also so much about like, and I think about this all the time because I think a lot of discourse around play in terms of like, I don't know, like around parenting and around teaching and stuff right now is really about the medicalization of like neurodiversity. And so like the most I know about how children are supposed to play comes from like everyone explaining how you're not supposed to play because it's like bad if children put toys in lines. And I'm like, no one's been able to explain to me why this is bad other than that like a lot of autistic children do it. But like, I don't know, maybe it's nice to organize things. I don't, right? Like, I think, like, and that's like a lot of where we're talking about play right now is that. And I find that like really, like, it feels very like medicalization of like how children use their toys, which is like, I don't know. I don't feel great about it. Like,
Phil, you had mentioned having a question, yeah?
Yeah, and it's more specific. Ooh, I'll slide in. It is more specifically about, I can just lean in a lot like this. There we go. More specifically about video game history, even though I know we're talking about play history in general, which was, I was really struck that, as you mentioned, what you mentioned about the American Girl stories being sort of the like alternative histories of like, what if girls were taken seriously in this era? And I know for like arcade culture and Pac-Man specifically, that's kind of an interesting fraught time to do it, because I know there's a lot of scholarship and research around that about how, you know, like gender hostility in those spaces. And I think about people like the work of like Rachel Simone Weil, where it's less about trying to insert girls into, you know, like a traditionally masculine space as being taken seriously, and more about like imagining alternative spaces that could have existed. It's interesting that the American Girl dolls are going in the what if girls were accepted in arcades versus like what if there was like, what if they had commissioned an original American Girl doll machine that she plays? And it's like, oh yeah, the American Girl, that was the biggest IP in arcades at the time. So like, I don't know if you are seeing in any other sort of spaces around Toys R Us or anything that sort of reimagining where it's like, Courtney, I know there's like a game dev Barbie, I know is a thing, but like, I don't know.
And Game Dev Barbie was like a game developer consultant on it. Like they hired a woman game developer to come in and consult on the doll. And that was true also with the Girl Scouts has a game developer badge, and the badge was actually like developed in conversation with game developers. So I think an important thing, like with American Girl specifically, like they almost, I think the odds of them doing a self-insert like that would be pretty small, because, I mean, they have one, right? Like you can get the tiny Molly doll for your Courtney doll so that your doll has a doll. But like, there's really an emphasis on historical authenticity, right? And like, it's again fraught because the idea of authenticity always is, but like they really go into a lot of detail about like what people were eating and what they were wearing and like what, you know, like that kind of culture of daily life. I am interested. I haven't looked at their 90s doll. They're twins. There's two of them because then they can sell you two dolls. The 90s dolls, like the Y2K dolls, because I'm really curious. I'm like, do they have a Tamagotchi? I feel like they should have a Tamagotchi. But there's also some interesting things that like disappear. So there's Atari actually had a licensed Strawberry Shortcake game. There were a couple of several Cabbage Patch games released, and things like this, like in the 80s. So it's interesting, like why not that, right? Like,
it's like I'm picturing like if they did a 90s one, would she play Sonic or would she be playing Purple Moon games? Like which of these have they leaned into? Yeah,
well, it's hard too because I think part of the appeal of the arcade game is that it puts her in a public place where she interacts with other people, whereas like so much of this is brought into the home. So like she plays NES in the story, but it's like at some other kid's house, right? Like, and that's like a much less narratively dynamic setting.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
I thought about that.
I'm gonna ask one last question, and this is a fun one.
All right.
You know, if you Carly, let's imagine you are the product consultant for the Gen Alpha American Girl doll.
Mm-hmm.
What would she be? Like we were kind of joking about this in the chat. Like what, you know, insufferable name would she have? What would her toys be? You know,
she would have, for sure, she should have a Labubu, like a tiny one. It would be so cute, right? That's like, that would be great. That'd be a really good crossover. I bet she'd have like a branded backpack. I don't know what the coolest one is right now, but like definitely like I noticed the youths, they all have the same backpack and then it changes every couple of years. So like got to figure that out. Like I don't know. It's kind of weird because like I feel like I'm exactly the age that like all the teenagers right now are dressed like I was in high school. So I'm like, oh, I know what this looks like. Like there's like a lot of face gems, like body glitters back, you know. Like,
yeah, I was like, is she playing Roblox? Is that?
Oh God, I hope not. I hate Roblox. You know. They can play Minecraft. Actually, Minecraft's still really big.
Yeah, Pokemon and Minecraft now, mentioned in the chat, and then someone said the personal drama would be I think it was Lilia 9909 said the personal drama would be getting through COVID, which I was just like, I don't know. I'm emotionally prepared to deal 20 years
from now. A doll that has to deal with COVID.
With an American Girl doll dealing with COVID. Like,
I was gonna say her dad put all his money into a blockchain startup. And
yeah, and I mean it's interesting because like I mean this is actually something a connection here is in Purple Moon, like in the Secret Past games, which I find absolutely beautiful, like fraught and dated in the ways that they are, but beautiful, right? Because they're really about like folklore and storytelling as like ways of making sense of the world, which is like such a lovely thing. But like they all have like a problem, and you read through this one, and most of them have like child problems, like someone made fun of me at dance class, or like, you know, like things that you're like, that sucks, but also I as an adult can help you figure out how to deal with that. And the one was like, my dad abandoned me and my mom's so depressed that she never gets out of bed and we don't have money for me to go to the dance. And I'm just like, Jesus Christ, or, you know, like, I don't, like, that's horrible. And I feel like that's where Addie fits in the American Girl universe. Is it's like, oh, like, I'm like, normal problem. Good God, like, why would we make that something to play with? Like, you know, and they now have another doll who's like Harlem Renaissance era, which is like much more celebratory and less fraught, right? And it's, again, like, I know like tons of people put tons of research in these dolls and they're super interesting. And yeah, maybe they would have to get through the pandemic or like online. Maybe it's like post-pandemic and they're just still in school online, like, and they hate it.
Like online teaching.
Online high school has happened to them and it's sad.
Justin having like in-person friendships, and that's like the social element. Instead of her being on Zoom, it's like she's meeting people for the first time.
Could you imagine a child-sized laptop? Like Chromebook that just has on it. Like I wanna die just thinking about it.
I think the 90s dolls might have a computer.
That would make sense. Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, but like the Chromebook.
Yeah,
right,
no, that's very
the kids were like sent home with. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Before we give our overlords too many ideas, I think I need to wrap this up. Carly, this was such a blast. Thank you so much for coming to share your work with us. This is really exciting. Is there an like a output we can expect?
Yeah, definitely. I'm wrapping up the article on this. I'm hoping to submit it end of the summer, and then eventually there will be the Games for Girls book, and some of this will probably come into the conclusion on that. But yeah.
Awesome. All right. Stuff to look forward to. And Phil, anything else?
No, this is great. No, this is wonderful. This was a random, nice happenstance thing that happened during vacation. Nice. So it is good to see you again, Carly. My goodness.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for supporting ROMchip. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.